Welcome to In the Ven Zone with Christine McKay, where we get candid about what it takes to negotiate effectively. You'll learn from the challenges and successes of entrepreneurs, executives, and experts. We help you change the nature of your negotiations and get more from every deal you do.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another exciting episode of In the Ven Zone, where we help you, the small and mid-sized business, elevate your negotiations, help you ask for more of what you want, and provide you tools and techniques and ideas and strategies for how you can negotiate for that. And we do that by bringing you fantastic guests. And today is no exception. Today, I have with me Joyce Marter. She is a celebrated psychotherapist, entrepreneur, founder of Urban Balance, which is a really cool company, and I can't wait for her to tell you more about it. She's a national speaker. She's a frequent media contributor, and she's the author of the upcoming book, The Financial Mindset, a mental fitness program for an abundant life, which is due later in July. And she shares in that book a 360-degree holistic view of success with practical tools, guidance, etc., to amplify your self-worth, self-esteem, and create financial abundance. And I was just saying to Joyce, before I hit the record button, that when I first was introduced to Joyce, I wasn't really sure how her topic was going to fit into the conversation about negotiation. Because I've had a lot of people who are financial wellness experts and all that try to be on the show, and I've talked to them, and it's just like, we can never figure out what the thread of this conversation was going to be so that you guys could actually get the most out of it. Well, Joyce was the exception to that rule. We had an amazing conversation when we were first talking to figure out what the thread of this thing was going to be. And all the work that she has done at Urban Balance is phenomenal. She built an incredibly successful business and practice there, and then sold it to private equity, and now is on this new mission based on all the things that she's seen in her career as a psychotherapist and the founder and owner of Urban Balance. Joyce, so glad to have you here. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure, Christine. I'm so excited to talk with you.
Yay. So for those of you who are tuning in for the first time, and those of you who have been listening for a while, you know this, but you can just go to VENN.zone any point in time, check out the show notes. There's some links in there. There's a free gift from me to you from there. And you'll also be Joyce is going to be offering you a free gift as well. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later, but just go to ven.zone to check that out. You can get a transcript as well as a link to our YouTube channel, as well as the podcast. So thank you. So Joyce, just fill in the blanks for us. So I kind of gave a very high level view of your background, but fill in the blanks. How did you get here?
Well, like you said, I'm a licensed psychotherapist, and I've been practicing for over 20 years. And I noticed something really interesting in my practice, that as my clients started to make progress in therapy, they started getting raises and promotions and starting their own businesses and prospering more. And I was like, why is this happening? Because we're not even talking about money. And I realized that no matter what we're working on in therapy, whether it's depression, anxiety, a relationship issue, we're always working on the person's underlying self-worth. And as their self-esteem improved, they were putting themselves out in the world differently, valuing themselves and communicating assertively and negotiating. Mm-hmm. And I became very interested in the psychology of money, how people's belief systems about money, their emotions around money, their trauma history around money, and their relationship with money, how that impacts their work, their careers, and their financial prosperity. Mm. And I was taking all the wisdom from my clients and applying it to my own life. So as a therapist, I think we all need therapy at different points. I'm really passionate about destigmatizing mental health. And I went to my own therapist and I said, I'm having some financial struggles. I started my practice with $500 and $50,000 of student loan debt and went through some challenging times in my business. And she said, well, what does the word money mean to you? And I said, well, I think of stress. And she said, well, no wonder you make it go away. So I had to reprogram my thinking about money. And I started Urban Balance, which my intention was that I saw a need for insurance-friendly counseling and therapy in the Chicagoland area. I believe therapy is like going to the dentist or the doctor, and it should be accessible and affordable and a routine part of preventative health care. And so I thought if I could provide the office space, the billing, and the referrals to other therapists, I could have greater prosperity and also work-life balance, which is why I named it Urban Balance. I felt like being a mom is my highest role, and I wanted to be at home with my kids before and after school and on the weekends. And so the practice grew tremendously. I definitely believe when you look for the universal win-win, it was a win for me. It was a win for my staff because they had flexible part-time jobs, a lot of working parents, and then a win for the clients because the therapy was accessible and affordable. And so it grew tremendously. And like you said, I was able to successfully sell Urban Balance a few years ago in 2017. And at that point, I did a lot of work on negotiation and attended some seminars and was very intentional about the process of selling my business. And today, like you said, I have my book that I can't wait to share with the world and support others in creating a life of holistic success and financial abundance and work-life balance and everything else. And I love public speaking. So thank you for having me on today.
I'm really excited. The conversation we had before was just really, really great. And so I'm really excited to have you here. So one of the things that I talk about is how the hardest part of any negotiation is what the negotiation we have between our ears. And so what you're talking about really resonates, that, and I have suffered, and I've never disclosed this in such a public way, but I suffer from bipolar 2. So I don't have manic highs, but I do get manic lows. And I've tried various different treatment options and all that. And one of the things that I've noticed that has helped me is taking action. That if I just, I now have been into my condition for long enough that I can start to recognize when I can feel the episode coming on. And so I can take corrective measures. And one of the biggest things for me has been my business. I find that actually being in business has helped me manage those depressive episodes. They're much, much shorter. They're much more controllable because I just have, as an entrepreneur, I just have so many things to do.
Yes.
And whenever I have something to do, that helps elevate me, move me out of that condition. But I see that too. When you get a win in business, then that win in business just affects every other part of your life. And so when you're working with a therapist and you're seeing those improvements, and I just think that's really great. And I love that you made it insurance friendly. I love that word because I live in California, and mental health care is not insurance friendly in California.
No,
it's actually really, really difficult. It's very expensive. So we have, I live on the edge of Skid Row, and I'm surrounded by people who need access to affordable mental health care. And it just doesn't really exist except in a volunteer basis. And it's a thing. So I really appreciate that you built Urban Balance. And so for those of you in the Chicago area, even though Joyce doesn't own it anymore, her story of the sale of it is actually really interesting. And I want to talk a little bit about that because a while ago I had a person that she was trying to sell her business, a totally different kind of industry. And she had 4 prospects. At the time, and it was her second attempt to sell it. She tried to sell it a few years ago, but she calls it a green banana, and it was a green banana then. And she was using a broker, and the broker drummed up 4 different offers, 2 from private equity firms and 2 from industry. And her business services children, it's a completely different kind of business, but it was interesting because in my conversation with her, I said, okay, so you got two people who understand the business that you do and the industry you do, and you've got two companies that are PE firms, which not all PE firms are kind of barracudas, but the reputation of PE firms, and I've worked with many of them, is, they go in and they cut the fat, they get it down as lean as possible. And it's not necessarily the same kind of business that you actually sold them, because they're getting their money by selling or fixing operations, so to speak. So it's cutting staff, changing processes, all that good stuff. And you sold to a private equity, and she had not even thought of it. I was like, how do you want your to be remembered, in 5 years when somebody sees that your brand? What do you want them to think of at that moment when you're no longer involved, but they know that you were part of that brand? And, and she had never been asked that question. She had never thought about that question. And she and I have another call next week to actually start to talk about some of these things. So, but you sold to a private equity firm with a heart, and you were really intentional about how you found your buyer, and you actually walked away from a better offer because you didn't think that that buyer was aligned with your mission. Tell us more about that story.
Absolutely. Well, first, Christine, I want to thank you for sharing about your bipolar 2 disorder. I just think it's so helpful, because we all have mental health like we have physical health, and we have to manage it to the best of our ability. I was afraid when I first started graduate school that my professors were going to see that I dealt with an anxiety disorder and that they'd tell me I couldn't be a therapist. But I think we all deal with it in different ways. And so being successful in our work involves taking care of our mental health and arranging our work so that it supports and promotes our mental health. So thank you for that. In terms of the sale of the business, I love the green banana analogy, and I had that earlier. I had a business partner who left suddenly when we were at a time of extreme distress in our business. And it was that time that I saw a business valuation, and my CPA said, "What's your exit plan?"
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, I kind of panicked and thought about selling prematurely. And I'm so glad that he encouraged me not to. And he encouraged me to think about spending the next 5 years really strengthening the business to sell. And when I sold it, we had 10 locations in 3 states. Today, there's 17 locations in 6 states.
That's
and
awesome.
So what I did is I really thought through my vision. I thought through, okay, if I had a magic wand, what would the price be? What would the financial situation look like? Would I be paid up front? Would I have a note or an escrow? I thought about my role. What would I want my role to be after the sale? Do I want to be completely freed of all responsibilities? Do I want to stay in some way?
Mm-hmm.
Do I want to be able to invest so that I have some skin in the game and can maybe have a second bite of the apple, if you will? And most importantly, I'm mission oriented with my business, and I really wanted to find a buyer who was aligned with my mission to do good in the world and to be of service to others. And that really was paramount for me. And, I sold to Refresh Mental Health, which owned a number of mental health and eating disorder companies around the country. And they have a really fine leadership team, and they're backed by private equity. So it's a little bit of a hybrid situation where I know the players that were in leadership, and the other owners of the other practices were very well-respected clinicians. And so I thought about each of these things, as well as branding, because Urban Balance was my baby, and I didn't want it to get swallowed by some other hospital conglomeration or some other behavioral health entity that would take away the name. And I wanted things to stay as much the same for staff and for clients. I didn't want the business model to change dramatically. And so I used a business broker. We had 50 interested buyers.
Wow.
And we had 8 offers, and they were very, very different. Some of the buyers wanted to keep me on as CEO, which I didn't really want. One of the things that was really important to me was that I didn't want clinical liability anymore.
Oh, yeah.
And some people wanted me to stay on as clinical director. So I made a really firm list of what I needed from the transaction. And I love how you talk about negotiation as being a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And so my interviews with the prospective buyers was, establishing rapport, getting to understand their vision, how it aligned with my vision. Could we find a win-win? I also, as a therapist, really believe in emotional intelligence. And when I attended a negotiation seminar at Kellogg, the School of Business at Northwestern, the guest speaker was Marianne Cooper, the sociologist who helped Sheryl Sandberg write Lean In. And the other person speaking was a psychologist. And they said most of negotiation is psychology. It's about us valuing our worth, about our communication, about, having empathy and compassion for the other party, communicating respectfully, assertively, collaborating, problem solving, being creative, and, respecting yourself and the other party through the process. And so I really used some of my mindfulness strategies that I teach in therapy to pay attention to how I felt in my body. That I know that might sound a little woo-woo.
No.
When I was sitting with prospective buyers, and I would take notes, and oftentimes it wasn't necessarily about what they were saying, but I wrote how I felt as I was sitting with them. And I believe in the wisdom of the body. And there were times where I'd be sitting with someone and I would have a nervous feeling in my gut or some discomfort. And I really paid attention to that, because when we get stuck in our heads, we can make intellectualized decisions and we can sort of block our intuitive awareness. One buyer, for example, I had that kind of nauseous feeling when I was talking to him. And he asked me if the opioid epidemic was good for business. And I was like, okay, there's a huge difference between profiting by doing good in the world and helping people with their mental health and profiting off of people's suffering. And so his heart wasn't in the right place. So I was like, no way.
Even seeing dollar signs on every patient.
So I really think it's important for people to look at selling their business when there's no urgency to it, if in a perfect world, so that you can walk away. And even in my transaction, which I'm so happy about, I feel so blessed and grateful and thankful. And, I'm so happy that things are going well with Refresh Mental Health. Even in that transaction, in the later stages of due diligence, they wanted me to stay on as clinical director. And I had to say that was a hard no. And they said, are you serious? You'd let this whole deal fall apart because of that? And I said, yeah. And so they hired someone else to do that. So I was glad that I stuck to my guns.
I think that's really, and there's a lot of stuff we can kind of talk about in there. So one of the things that I talk about a lot is how critical it is in negotiation to get abundantly clear on what it is you really want, not just what you need, but what you want. And when I speak on stages, I always evoke my grandmother when I talk about getting clear. It's like getting clear down to the gnat's ass level details. The smallest of things. What are all the possibilities that could exist here? And some of it you don't know, because if you're selling your business and you never sold a business before, you may need to go get some education on what's the language that's used, because there's a language in mergers and acquisitions. And I've spent many, many years in mergers and acquisitions and divestitures, and it has its own lingo. It has its own jargon. And so go learn it before you're sitting down at the table, figure out what, understand what the accountant's going to be asking for, and understand what free cash flow means, what NOPAT means, net operating profit after tax. Figure out, are you doing a discounted cash flow analysis, a DCF analysis, and what do you do? Are you using multiples? Figure these things out. Do some homework, because you want to know what is your counterpart going to be thinking too, because it's not, once you're clear on what it is you want, right, then that gives you there is, especially when you're negotiating with somebody who you think has more leverage than you do, when you're clear on what it is you want and what you are willing and unwilling to do, there's power in that. I had interviewed on an episode that dropped not long ago with Bethany Sloggett. She's a woman who has a kitchen and bath business. She and her husband own a kitchen and bath business outside of Toronto. And she decided he wanted to move into the sticks outside of Toronto, like way out of Toronto. And she's kind of wasn't originally a way out kind of a person. And so she's like, okay, well, I'll do that, but I want to buy this company. And the company wasn't for sale. And she's like, I'm going to buy that company. And if you're going to move me all the way out there, you're going to let me buy this company. Well, she just had her son. He was 4 months old.
Wow.
And she was still nursing, and she was going into this negotiation with 4 men. And she knew that she was going to have to take the baby with her. And she decided to dress so that she could nurse in the negotiation room, because she knew that if she walked out of that room, if she left the room, those 4 men were going to have a conversation that she would never be privy to.
Yeah.
And she would lose, and it was her family's money. And
right.
And it was the difference between, having this for retirement and having that for retirement, much less. And so she planned it so that she knew, right? She stood in her power. And that's what you did by being clear on what it is. I'm not going to be a clinical director. I'm not staying on it as CEO. I don't want to do day-to-day operations, and I don't want the liability. And so you were very, very clear in that. And that gives you that ability to walk away, so that when a counterpart says, are you really willing to throw this deal because of that? And when you can say, yeah, and you can say it without hesitation, with no fear, no nothing. It's just a pragmatic, yeah, this is we're talking about what our relationship is going to look like. And if this relationship is going to work, I can't be in that role. It's just that simple.
Absolutely. I think you bring up a couple of really good points about educating yourself about the mergers and acquisitions process and the terms. I had to learn a tremendous amount. My broker was very generous in educating me through the process. And then also, like your example of the woman not leaving the room when she needed to breastfeed, I was on a call with some prospective buyers and my broker, and the time of the call had ended. I had another meeting I needed to go. They were going to stay on. And my broker said, well, it's not like Joyce understands accrual anyway. And yeah, that was my.
Okay, so for those of you who are listening and not watching, my jaw just hit the floor. How, as my daughter says, how rude.
How rude. So
rude.
He definitely knew I was just pleased. And I said, don't mistake my outsourcing for consultants and advisors for me not understanding, sometimes. And I said, this call is ending now and we can resume together, at another time. And he called me back and he said, said something wrong. And I said, yeah, you said something wrong.
Well, and I don't generally get into kind of the male female things, but he would never have said that if it was a guy in the room. That never would have been said. So
no,
one of, I think that, and like I said, I don't often get into kind of male differences between men and women as negotiators, because research shows, like all over the world in all sorts of institutions, shows that women are better at negotiating. Men are better at haggling, but women are better at negotiating. We
Right.
think in a circle, and men think in a box, and they compartmentalize things so they can separate things. But women look across the whole of a relationship to figure out where we can go and where we can't go. And it research says that, and I will put the research on in the show notes. We will go and do that so you can, because it's the first episode I've ever brought this up on. And so one of the challenges, and on an episode with Matthew Marini, an earlier episode, he actually asked me, we had that episode is like a masterclass in negotiation. It's the longest episode I've recorded, but we covered so many things. And he asked me a question. He said, Christine, you have a very pleasant voice. And he's like, that must help you in negotiation. And he said, and he's happily married. And you're attractive. And he's like, that must help. And I said, actually, no. I said, being attractive in negotiation hurts, because as soon as a guy sees you as attractive, a lot of them, it changes how they interact with you. Mm-hmm. And it changes how they think they can treat you. Mm-hmm. And so as a woman, everybody, I don't care, male, female, non-binary, don't care. Yes. Everyone needs to be clear on what it is that they want. But as a woman, you especially need to be clear and as non-binary, because it's very easy to get pulled in a different direction if you lack clarity. And so I think it's just, between you and Bethany, Bethany's story, I just think is amazing. And the way you're describing, your deal is just huge. Now, how did the sale translate for you into the financial independence? How did selling Urban Balance lead you to write the book? Tell us a little bit about the book.
Well, so the book is, I have been giving a talk called The Psychology of Success for about 10 years. And it started in the local Chicago business community. And now I'm presenting for global Fortune 500 companies, around the world. And so it's based on the 12 mindsets that I've seen that lead to holistic success. And when I sold Urban Balance, my hope and dream was that I wanted to focus on speaking and writing. That's my next chapter of my career. I just feel so driven to share what I've learned from my clients and from my own entrepreneurial journey. So when I sold, I was able to kind of get my chips off the table and earn, a nest egg that I felt really great about. I also was able to reinvest in the parent company, and they since have sold again. So I got that second bite of the apple, was able to invest again. So I'm still in the game, which is great. And then I've been able to free myself in terms of being able to focus on my book writing and public speaking. I'm doing a ton of webinars during COVID, helping people promote mental health and resilience. And so it's been a real win-win, and I'm really, really happy about the decision, and still am on as founder at Urban Balance. I still see a handful of clients there, and I'm a senior advisor and brand ambassador for Refresh Mental Health. So it's been a great win-win.
And the book comes out when, and what's the title again?
It's The Financial Mindset Fix, a mental fitness program for an abundant life. And it's being published by Sounds True, which they're the publisher for Brené Brown and Eckhart Tolle and some of my very favorite authors.
Oh, that's
and
awesome.
It's available for pre-sales on Amazon now, but it'll be in bookstores July 27th. And it's going to be in Spanish and published in Spain and Latin America as well. So
that's awesome. Congratulations on that. And so for everybody, so if you're tuning in, we are sitting here visiting with Joyce Marter, and we're talking about her upcoming book. And if you go to ven.zone, you can download the show or see the show notes. You can find out more about Joyce's book. We'll have links to gift from us at Ven Negotiation, and Joyce is going to share a gift too. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. But okay, so now you've sold the business, And kind of what out of that process, what are some of the things you learned that surprised you about negotiating?
Oh my goodness. Well, definitely it's a challenging process. I was told by my broker that selling a business takes on average about a year. For me, it was a year and a half process. So it's tiring. And there were moments where I started to fatigue out and feel like I was just going to kind of throw in the towel or sell it to someone that maybe wasn't the ideal fit. So it took a lot of self-care and stamina to stay strong throughout the process. I also learned the importance of having great advisors, not only my broker, but also my CPA, my financial planner, my therapist, my friends and family. You need that board of advisors to help keep you strong. And one thing that did surprise me, or it was an important lesson for me, is, there's human nature, and everyone in some ways is advocating for themselves in some ways. And there were times that my advisors would suggest that I do something that I started to wonder if it was because of their own benefit or gain. And it was maybe something I didn't fully understand. And so my strategy for that was I would have them in the same meeting and say, okay, my accountant recommended this. Attorney, what do you think about that? And they're friends, they know each other. And I could tell that the attorney knew that the accountant was trying to pull something over on me, or vice versa. And so that helped kind of, if it was something beyond what I understood about mergers and acquisitions, that helped me know the truth and sort of make decisions from a place of my own best interests, rather than kind of getting swayed by other people's desires.
I love that, because that's really important. I'm talking like Porky the Pig. It's a morning. It's hugely important, because, a lot of times we assume that advisors understand the whole of the situation, and that all the advice that they're giving us, because we're paying for it, is good advice. But not all advice is good advice. And I love how you leaned into your gut feeling. And one of my authors that I'm like just in love with, every book I've ever read of his, is Malcolm Gladwell. And in his book Blink, he talks about that gut feeling, that the piece of archaeological art that they found, that people knew, they just had this gut reaction that this thing is a fake. And then millions of dollars later, after the Getty bought it, oh, guess what? Yeah, it is fake. And you just got taken, but then in his book, Talking with Strangers, which is absolutely my favorite book of his, he talks about how our minds kind of play tricks us. We want to always believe the best in people. Yeah. And he opens the book by telling the story of Neville Chamberlain. And Neville Chamberlain was the only Western leader ever to meet with Hitler. And every single time, because he met with him multiple times, every single time he met with Hitler, Chamberlain walked away going, "Don't worry, he's not as bad as you think he is." Yet everybody who had not met him knew that he was as bad as everyone thought he was, right?
Wow.
But our brains, and he pulls out research and talks about how judges misjudge somebody who's standing in front of them. They think that they can give them leniency, and they probably shouldn't have. And just our brains play tricks on us, because we have this dual thing going on, where we don't listen to our gut. We don't listen, we listen with the logic part of our head. And when we're making decisions, we feel it first before we think it, right? It's yes. Emotion leads logic. It's not the other direction. And so when we don't listen to that gut feeling, we're missing a big cue, a big cue, which is why I love when you talked about selling, that relying on the body to tell you that, oh, this just doesn't feel quite right to me. And then the other thing is just making sure that, when your advisors, we all have self-interest, we all do. And it's not that people are bad. It's that
No.
people are, of course, we're operating from a position of self-interest. It's discovering when their self-interest is kind of trumping your interests and figuring out how to balance that out with each other as part of the relationship. And it's important to recognize when an advisor seems to be operating out of their own self-interest and call them on it. Just name that and say, hey, look, this is what I'm seeing. This is how I'm feeling about that. And what are we going to do about it? And just be transparent about that stuff.
Absolutely. And you mentioned gender roles. I thought it was interesting that out of the 50 prospective buyers, they were all men. And my attorneys, my advisors were all men. And so that was an interesting process for me. And I agree that sometimes some people treat you differently as a woman. And I very much paid attention to that. One prospective buyer was nice, was like, oh, you're such a pretty face. We'd like to have you on TV for the company and things like that. And I got kind of a yucky feeling about it. And my business is mostly women in leaderships, a lot of female clients. And I had a kind of a sexist vibe from him and, chose not to go in that direction. So I pay attention a lot to nonverbals. And when people's words don't seem to be aligning with their nonverbal expression. I have a friend and colleague who used to work for the FBI, and she's a body language expert. And I realized after attending her seminars, I've been using those strategies for a long time. And I can tell when there's missing information or people aren't being truthful. And so that's an important skill set when making a deal.
Yeah, one of my heroes is Paul Ekman, and he's the father of micro expressions and research, and out of the University of Chicago, and he's the protagonist in the TV show Lie to Me, which is a great TV show. But nonverbals are hugely important, and micro expressions, we all use the exact same things. We all contort our face in exactly the same way, and you can't fake it and you can't hide them. It's just not possible, because it's a micro expression. It's a reflection or a reflex. That's what I was going. Yeah, it's a reflex. And so, that it's hugely important. I was talking to somebody recently about all the international negotiations I've done. And I was in Panama, and we were in this negotiation with, it was me, with the company from Panama and a company from Colombia. So I don't speak Spanish fluently. And so let me be honest, I barely speak Spanish. But they were trying to negotiate in English because I was in the room, and I'm like, don't talk to the lowest common denominator in the room. I'm like, you'll be surprised what I learned just by watching your expressions. And so studying their nonverbal cues and looking for micro expressions, I was like, oh, what you just said, that he has utter contempt for that, or, oh man, you just pushed a button, he's really ticked off, right? And it's like, and then with my client, I could go and say, this point that you said here, and I would pick up a couple of the words, in Spanish. It'd be, the things you said here, right? This is how he reacted to that. And you do not want that reaction. So, or, the person who was, reacting with contempt, I'm like, we got a problem here in terms of the relationship as a whole. How are we going to fix that? And they're like, how in the heck did you pick that up? And I was like, because I don't understand the language, all I could pay attention to was the nonverbals, and nonverbals are universal. And so I can't emphasize enough the importance of understanding nonverbals. And if you're negotiating a lot, or if you're like Joyce and you are selling your baby, which is your business that you spent years and years building, and you want to, I love that you took courses to understand a bunch of different things as you were going into this whole process, because it shows the care that you had toward the sale of it, and that it was about far more than just the amount of money that you were going to get out of it.
No, absolutely. Thank you for that. I found having lunch with people who had sold businesses was also really helpful, and learning from them about their experiences and what went well and what didn't. And you mentioned something about possibility, about women and thinking of possibility. And part of my book is about having that abundant mindset, that it's not just choice A or choice B, there's infinite choices. and so expanding your thinking that way, that really anything is possible. And so I think that gives you, it just opens up a whole world of opportunities, rather than thinking kind of linearly about, there's only one way to do things, because there's a lot of different ways to sell a business and a lot of different buyers that you can choose from.
Absolutely. I have a saying that if you can conceive it, you can paper it, right? If you can come up with the idea, as long as it's not illegal. So if it's illegal, you don't want to paper it, but, and don't do it. But if there's nothing wrong from a legality perspective, if you can conceive it, you can put in a contract.
Yes.
So, but it's, that's part of what I love about negotiation is, and somebody asked me recently, if I had to pick one core value for my company, what is it? Just one. I said, curiosity.
Oh,
if
beautiful.
you are not curious about yourself, if your counterparts and the situation in which you find yourself, then this is not the organization for you, right? We're not the right company to serve you. We're not the right company for you to work at, and et cetera, right? That is our number one value, because curiosity is what allows you to see possibilities, and recognizing that, if I have an idea and I say something, every single person in the room is going to hear that idea differently, because every single person in the room has a different set of experiences that informs how they're going to react to my idea, right?
Definitely.
It's not personal. It's not personal to me. It's personal to them, right? And so my job as a negotiator is to understand, to get them to disclose what's causing that a specific reaction, right? And to get their ideas, to see what other perspectives they have that could make my idea even better. And I love that. That's Absolutely. What I love about negotiating.
It's can be very fun. And one of the things that Refresh offered to me that I didn't expect was to be brand ambassador. And that was like an extra little bonus for me, because I do love doing speaking and media work, and that I enjoy that anyway. And so why not do that in the name of the company that I'm invested in? And so that was a win-win for both.
Oh, that's really cool. I want to ask you real quick, because I think one of the things that I know in my situation with my mental health issues, that one of the challenges that I had to learn how to overcome was the fear of saying no. I was afraid of saying no. And a lot of people, I mean, I've negotiated with so many different companies and worked with thousands of people, and we're all afraid to ask for what we want at different points in our lives. And some of us are more confident in asking for it more often than others. But we're all afraid to ask for more sometimes. But we're also all afraid at times to say no to something. And I find when people are, at least anecdotally for me, when I'm kind of in a low state, it's much harder for me to say no, because that no requires a level of power. And Chris Voss, in his book, Never Split the Difference. Chris and I have a lot of differences of opinion on certain things. But one of the things that he talks about, he kind of pushes people to say no, because he assumes that if if somebody says no, that they're acting from a position, they feel like they have power. Whereas if people don't have the opportunity to say no, then saying yes isn't as powerful. And I don't necessarily agree with that. But what is in your experience, and based on what you went through in the sale of the business, what's your experience around the word no? Such a short but yet effective full stop sentence. Such a powerful word, but we're so afraid to use it sometimes. Can you comment a little bit on that?
Absolutely. I think, saying no and setting healthy limits and boundaries in relationships, our boundaries are financial, they might be informational, they might be time boundaries. And we need to have healthy assertiveness to say no and set those limits. And it is really hard for many of us. I think particularly women are socialized to be people pleasers. And it can be anxiety provoking to think about disappointing someone or initiating some sort of conflict. I always say that healthy self-esteem is midway between diva and doormat. And so the diva is someone who's entitled and isn't respectful of other people's boundaries. And that's one aspect of ego that can be harmful in relationships. It can turn people off. You can lose deals that way.
Absolutely.
And then on the other side is the doormat, somebody who is not being respectful of their own boundaries. And so in therapy and in my own journey on myself, it's about finding that healthy self-esteem in the middle where you care about yourself and you advocate for yourself in the way that you would for somebody you love very much. In some ways, motherhood helped me become a better negotiator because it was no longer about just me anymore. This was about my legacy and my daughters, and that was easier for me to be the mama bear and say no for their sake. And it takes practice. I like having heroes. So if you know somebody who's good at setting boundaries and in a way that's diplomatic, that's kind and clear and respectful, it doesn't need to be rude. But having that hero and acting as if you're them and just practicing it, role playing it, and working on it. And you can really create some important shifts in your relationship and in your life by learning to say no.
That brings up a story for me for when my daughters were younger, because my daughters are all in their mid-30s now. But my oldest daughter was at a friend's house and she called me. She was supposed to be coming home and she called and said, so-and-so wants me to stay. And can I stay? And there was something in her voice. And I said, do you want me to say no?
Yes.
And she said, yes. And I said, no. Right. And it's like the power of no. Sometimes it's like, and I love that. I love that story. And I just recently remembered that story. I was talking to somebody. I don't know why I remembered it, but I thought it really was effective in illustrating the power of no. And when somebody, in that case, my oldest child, didn't feel that she had the authority or the agency to say no, because she was in her friend's house, she didn't want to lose face with her friend. And so she needed somebody else to say no for her, right, on her behalf. And I was very proud of myself in that moment that I picked that up, that I was like, wait a minute, I think she doesn't want to stay. Let me ask her if she wants me to say no. I didn't say, do you want me to say yes? But do you want me to say no? And that I started using that with all of my kids, and it was great. They loved it, because it was one of those things that they could still look good in front of their friends, and then I could be the bad person and say, well, my mom said I can't stay.
It's brilliant. I had the same thing happen with my daughter, where she was like, what time am I supposed to come home? And I told my husband, and he said, she wants you to tell her to come home now. And he's a school counselor, an adolescent counselor. And you're absolutely right. And in adult life, we can deal with that same discomfort as well. In my business, sometimes I would have my staff members asking for a raise or something that really was not within the scale of the business. It was something I couldn't afford to give them. And if I said no, the conversation didn't seem to end. But if I said, I presented this to my CPA and he says, no, it's not possible, it seemed to end. So
Right.
sometimes just having that authority figure one layer above is a useful strategy.
And I talk about that a lot because it is important as a small business owner, especially. It's really important, a small and mid-size, to have an advisory board. When you are in kind of high stakes negotiation, for however you as a business owner define high stakes, I don't care. Could be with a customer, a supplier, an investor, maybe you're selling your business. You want to have a group outside of you that is informing your decisions, that when you are at the negotiation table, you can say, I really appreciate that offer. I'm curious, I'm curious about it, but I have to take it to my advisory group to discuss it and come back to you. You need that because I'm speaking to the audience. You need that because you want to give yourself that break. You want to, at Harvard, they call it going to the balcony. And you go to the balcony when things are tense, when things are not, they may not be going well, but you could go to the balcony when things are going great and you just need a pause because you need to go, maybe you're thinking with your head and not your gut. Is this the right decision? And I have a rule that when I'm negotiating, if I've not evaluated, let's say it's it's an important topic that in the negotiation, if I've not evaluated the impact of a give, I will not agree to it at the table in the moment. I will always allow myself the ability to go away, evaluate, and come back. Now that might take me 10 minutes, it might take me an hour, it may take me a couple weeks, right? But I'm never in a hurry to close a deal. Never in a hurry to close a deal. People think we have to get through a deal really fast. I'm like, no, that's a transaction. We're talking about being in a relationship here. I want to make sure that I am thoughtful about it. We have timelines and all of those kind of things, but even in M&A, like contracts need to be transferred, right? And I've had situations where people are like, we got to have this closed before this deal closes. And I said, do we really? I mean, can't we just backdate the contract? Can't we just, make the contract retroactive so it applies to this time? Do we really need to rush through it to get it? No, we don't really need to rush through it. So make sure you're taking your time and being intentional about the deals that you enter into, and make sure you have an advisory board so that you have somebody that you can go, I need to talk to these people to get their agreement. It's kind of a power move to be able to do that. But if you're a smaller business and you're negotiating with a larger organization, they will not expect you to play that. But trust me, they all have escalation paths. I would work directly under the CEO or the CFO, and I'd often say the board has to approve on this. Our next board meeting is on such and such a date, and so we can delay the deal by two months, or we can do these things today. It's up to you, kind of thing.
It buys you some time. It takes some pressure off of you personally, that there are other people that are involved in the decision, and none of us can know everything. So having other people's thoughts and perspective, you get a much more comprehensive understanding and viewpoint. And so, taking the time for that consultation is so important. Exactly. And I like how you also kind of zoom out, like instead of just accepting that something has to be done a certain way or in a certain timeline, if you zoom out and look at it from a bigger perspective, you can see maybe not, maybe there's some other ways that this can be done that will allow you more time to be thoughtful.
Yeah. And I mean, if I've evaluated what is being put on the table, then I'll agree or disagree at the table. But if I've not evaluated it, right, I make sure I give myself time to evaluate. So just to everybody who's listening, give yourself time. You never have to rush through a deal. And so it's okay to take time and to slow things down. Because when you get caught into this trap of making decisions quickly, those are emotional decisions, right? And those emotional decisions, you will judge yourself and judge your counterpart about them down the road, whether it's immediately or down the road, and you're not going to feel good about those emotional decisions, because you're going to come back and you're going to be living with the deal and you go, why in the heck did I agree to do this? Well, it's because you were being pushed and you made this emotional decision instead of saying, time out, I need to take a step back. I need to evaluate this and then go at it. So
you're reminding me. Oh,
what's
sorry. I was just going to say, I had one buyer that I loved, like personally. He just seemed like a really great guy and I wanted it to fit, but all the other pieces weren't really a match. And so I had to pull back and look at it more from a 360 viewpoint and let that opportunity go.
Yeah, because sometimes we get into business and we think we have to do business with people we always like. And right now there's this know, like, and trust thing that everyone talks about, that people who know me really well know that I have issues with it. I'm not a huge fan of the model, because there are times when I can really like somebody, but that does not mean I should be doing business with them. They may be qualified, they're not the good fit. But if I just go with it, man, this person's so cool, they're going to do right by me, da 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 da. I mean, I've done that and I've paid the price for it. It's not worked out so well. So yeah, so I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing that. So Joyce, this has been great. I have loved our conversation. Tell me, and I'm super excited about your book, The Financial Mindset Fix, a mental fitness program for an abundant life, coming out on July 27th of 2021. Cannot wait to get a copy of that. Looking forward to it. And tell us more. I think you have a gift for our audience. So tell us about that.
Yes, I'm in the process of creating a special PDF where I'll share some of my tools from my book on how to improve and leverage your psychology of money in negotiation. So lots of tools and tips on embracing your worth, on injecting positivity and abundant thinking in your negotiation process. And I'm super, super grateful to have spoken with you, Christine. You're doing such amazing work.
Well, thank you very much. I'm super excited to have you on the show. And to everyone who's been tuned in today, I just so appreciate you guys. You know, the greatest gift you can give us is your time. And so thank you so much for listening to this episode of In the Ven Zone. And don't forget, go to ven.zone, check out the show notes. We will have a link to Joyce's gift. We have a gift for you as well. You can find our YouTube channel there, as well as see a full transcript of this conversation. And we thank you so much for being here. And remember that negotiation is nothing more than a conversation about a relationship. And you cannot win a relationship, but you can get more value out of it. So happy negotiating, and we will see you next time on In the Ven Zone. Have a great day, everyone. Cheers.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of In the Ven Zone with Christine McKay. We invite you to visit our website at www.ven.zone to access the show notes and other helpful resources. Empower the negotiator in you and successfully level the playing field. Join us again next time here on In the Ven Zone.